I'm very excited to introduce the moderator of our next panel, Carol Cohn, chairman and founder of Cohn, Inc. We reached out to Carol last year when we did our first corporate social responsibility program. And again, as we were talking in between the break, the Better Business Bureau, we've been around for so long, and I've been with the BBB about 2 years. And when I got here, we started talking about corporate social responsibility and how it's been increasing in terms of awareness for businesses. And we said, this is something we really need to do. We are based in trust. We really need to do this type of a program. And Carol was one of the first people we reached out to. She's an innovator and a leader in the field of what she calls cause branding, a trademark name, for over 25 years. She has been the driving force behind such well-known and successful programs as the Avon Breast Cancer Crusade, ConAgra Foods, Feeding Children Better, the American Heart Association's Go Red for Women program, and Reebok's Human Rights Award, just to name a few. In her work to bring together corporations and consumers in an association to drive social good, Carol commissioned the Cohn-Roper Research Series, a 9-year longitudinal study on consumer and executive attitudes towards cause-related marketing that, it's one of the most exhaustive studies of its kind nationally, and it's viewed as a major force in the growth and popularity of cause marketing and CSR. She's received numerous recognitions. We're thrilled to have her today. She's going to introduce the panel, and with that, Carol.
Great. Thank you, Claire. It's great to be back at the BBB for this amazing session, and I have a great panel here because this morning with Stan and John, we were at 50,000 feet, maybe got to 30,000 feet. We've gotten definitive information. This is about business strategy, and this is no longer a nice to do, this is a have to do, and so I have the pleasure of working with, I don't have that much to do. It's my colleagues that have a lot to do here. They're practitioners. They're people that are on the line on a daily basis. And what's really great about the difference from where they sit in their organizations is that Chris has a public policy background. He comes from my neck of the woods up in New England. He's got great education from New England, Suffolk University at JD. He's got his MBA from Northeastern, worked at New England Telephone. Great background. Then you've got Dan, and I love his background at Time Warner because Dan works in philanthropic initiatives, but he says in his prior to doing what he's doing now, People Magazine, he's associate publisher of People Magazine and Entertainment Weekly, so he got to hang out with really cool people. And then you've got Caroline, and Caroline is at Pfizer, and she has 2 hats at Pfizer, both Vice President of Corporate Responsibility as well as President of the Pfizer Foundation. And also she was at RWJ, the Robert Wood Foundation, which is one of my favorites prior to joining Pfizer. So they each come to this field with a different set of responsibilities, a different definitions, and they have to deal with the challenges on a day-to-day basis. And so I want them to you're going to commiserate a little bit more with them. Each one's going to talk about 10 or 12 minutes about what they're doing, their definitions of CR, some of their challenges in this recessionary time. But at the end, before we turn it over to you, they're going to give you 2 or 3 nuggets that you can leave the room and take back to your workplaces and really implement. Now, I just want to see a show of hands. How many not-for-profits do we have in the room? Show of hands. A lot. Okay. How many for-profits? Okay. How many consultants? Okay. And how many others? Great. Okay. Others are fine, too. All right. So I don't believe I need to give you a lot of remarks about where this is going. I'd just like to say at Cohn, and thank you, Claire, for that kind introduction, we started with public-private partnerships in 1982. And I went to Brandeis, and I didn't burn any buildings, but I was definitely there during the year of the strike. And I learned about the power just in giving back to society. I was born into it in a way, and then I made it part of my life's work. But what we have seen at Cohn, because we have clients, we have global clients, we have not-for-profit clients, is that the cause side, the human face, That's what a lot of the CR becomes when you add cause branding or a name of an initiative, if it's the Avon Breast Cancer Crusade. But you then, as we've seen it over the years, the operations of the business needs to support that human side. There cannot be a dissonance. There has to be alignment. And so it was great that John and Stan talked about cross-functional teams, being strategic, being driven from the top. And so we have both at Cone the cause side, the communication side, the corporate responsibility side, all of these coming together because this is a very, very complex situation that we have to deal with in our lives, in our businesses. But at the end of the day, it needs to be emotional, it needs to be engaging, it needs to be inspirational, as John said. I love that, both the risk and the inspiration. And we also need to prove results because the major impact that we're seeing in terms of these times, if it's not embedded in the business, it gets cut. That is, if that's your core, we've heard it from, Stan said it, John said it, I'm saying it, our colleagues here are going to say it. It needs to be strategic. It needs to be embedded in the business, whether it's a portion and it's philanthropy, which is really important because you're helping the community, whether it's public policy, whether it's foundation, whether it's product development. So a key takeaway. And I always like to bring Jeff Immelt into the room. I think he's a little smarter than I am with a much larger empire to manage. But last year I got to follow Jeff in many, many places he was going. Harvard's Business School 100th anniversary, the Business for Social Responsibility Conference. And at BSR he had this amazing quote, which I will share with you. You can use it. It's great. And he said, when we come out of this fog, this notion that companies need to stand for something, they need to be accountable for more than just the money they earn, is going to be profound. And GE gets it. They get it on the philanthropy side, the community side. They get it on the product and innovation side. They have Eco-Imagination. They now have a new program, Health Imagination. They get it. And so it's embedded. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. And Chris is we're going to start with a couple of questions, such as, how does your organization define corporate responsibility? What are some of the objectives of this? And what are the benefits to your firm? And then he's going to riff as he'd like to. Chris.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me here today. I really relish this opportunity to represent Verizon. So I guess I'll frame it in the way that corporate responsibility, and that's the term that we use. We call it CR. It's not CSR in the sense that in some respects we find the S word to be limiting because it's not just about social. There are environmental. There are other things that we're trying to address as well. So it's really about what we do. It's a business strategy, and it's about how we do it as well. And I think for the opening, I'll just focus on that. So in terms of what we do, I thought Stan and John both touched upon this well. Corporate responsibility is there are risk management elements associated with it. It's a reputation management strategy in one sense, where you're trying to play offense and trying to present your brand and burnish not burnish your reputation in the marketplace. So there's the risk side of it, but sort of to use John's term, the inspirational side of it is really how can you use it as an opportunity to move your enterprise forward and address some new areas that potentially you might not have pursued in the past. And the examples I would use. So when I started, I've been with Verizon and its predecessors for about 26 years. So I started at New England Telephone 26 years ago, and basically all we provided at that point in time was telephone service, and we provided, basically black phones. If you liked black phones, we had all the phones that you wanted. And if you think about where we are today, we are a broadband and entertainment company. And what our strategy is, and really where it ties into the nexus to public policy, is this notion that how can you use these broadband services that we're rolling out, both wireline and wireless, to help stakeholders, whether that be the regulators at federal and state levels or nonprofit organizations like the groups that are represented here today. How can we use broadband services to really begin to address some of the most vexing challenges that our society faces? So we're focused in areas like access to technology. How can we use these technologies to help people that have disabilities, to help seniors, or help people that, perhaps just, for economic reasons don't have access to this technology? How do we get this out to them and help improve the quality of their lives? Educational community, Stan talked about it a little bit. Certainly IBM is very large in this space. Verizon is as well. How do you bring broadband into the classrooms? How do you use some of these online learning platforms? For example, Thinkfinity is our largest program. It's a free online learning community that's available to educators, to bring a multimedia experience to the students to enrich the quality of that education. The area that I personally am working in the most at this point is in the environment and climate change area. And here we're focusing on, how does a broadband lifestyle enable people to engage in more energy efficient behaviors? And what I mean by that, you probably everybody in this room is doing things that are inherently more energy efficient than what they used to do 10 years ago, but don't really realize it. So for an example, every time you download a song, right, you do that wirelessly, think of all the carbon that you've bypassed. You haven't driven to the store, you haven't required, there's no plastic associated with the CD or the jewel case or the packaging. It is just inherently more energy efficient to get, a digital copy of that song than it is to have, the CD or, if you remember back when, there were other forms of, other media, right? So that's an area that we're engaged in very much, and, I can talk some more, about sort of the public policy ramifications of that. And then healthcare is another area that we're very concerned about as well. I mean, it's sort of similar to the music. I mean, it's sort of silly the way we ask, doctors ask patients to run around with all sorts of media. You've got files of X-rays and MRIs and paper, and, all this stuff can be transmitted digitally. It's far more energy efficient, far more, far easier for the patient to manage. And then the last area is this whole notion of online safety. And it's really fundamental to our business, right? If we want people to consume, more information over broadband networks, we want to make sure that they feel safe and secure while they're online. So it's really sort of table stakes for our business. So what we're all about is trying to figure out how can we take these wonderful technologies, this high-speed broadband, and, how can we start to address some of these issues that we know as a society that we face, and engage with the policymakers and the other stakeholders that are also interested in dealing with the issues. And it's not necessarily the people that we always agree with, but it's the people we disagree with, because that's where you learn as well. So that's sort of what we're doing, and all of this generates business opportunity. And I'll just give you one quick example. When you look at the access to technology, some of these personal communications devices have become incredibly complex. So if you think of sort of the VCR, the blinking VCR syndrome, put a cell phone or a BlackBerry or a PDA in front of a senior, it's a challenge for them. So one of the things that we worked on, we've been working with a number of senior groups over the past 2 years to simplify those devices and simplify the calling plans that are associated with them, something that we had never done before, and the penetration rate, frankly, of that spectrum of the market was very low. And lo and behold, we found, our marketing people have found this brand new revenue stream that, they don't see this as CR anymore. They see this as good business, right? And they're wrestling that away from us. You guys get away, right? You've sold us on the business opportunity. Now let us go. And last year we had incremental revenue of $5 million new dollars on, one particular calling plan that never existed before. So, I mean, there's business value, and then there's social value, because now you have seniors that are participating in the digital age that were not doing that before. So they're now in constant communication when they're out. Their kids, caregivers, others can be in contact with them. So that's just one example. So that's sort of what we do, and I'll stop with that. How we do it, I have what we're trying to do with our employees. And I brought some of these along. This is sort of a little card that we hand out as we train employees. And on the front, it has, I know you can't see it, it's a circle. And right in the middle of the circle, it has trust and business freedom. And this gets, sort of to the central theme of what we're here for today. I mean, it's all about how can we conduct ourselves in a way so that we can engender trust and business freedom, certainly in Washington where I work, so that we can get the policymakers to listen to us when we, want to weigh in on a particular issue, but also so our customers, back to that online safety notion, they feel safe and secure when they're using Verizon broadband services. So the way we break it out, there are two pieces of it. There's an inside component, so we call this an inside-out analysis, and it's part of a framework for decision making. So we have 4 values. They're on the back of the card. They're integrity, integrity, respect, accountability, and performance excellence. So what we are trying to engender in our managers, whether I'm working in a call center or I'm a construction foreman, that has work that's maybe in your neighborhood, every time I make a decision, I'm supposed to make sure that decision I'm about to make, I'm supposed to make it in reference to our 4 values. Am I acting in accordance with those values so that I am aligned? So that's sort of the inside-out perspective. And by doing that, we can sort of get all 230,000 of our employees to be lined up and headed in the right direction. The other aspect of it, the outside-in piece, is really where sort of members of this audience come and the policymakers. We can't act in a vacuum. Every decision that we're about to make has impact on the community. There are people that have different interests that we probably don't even think about. And the other piece of it is, if we want to protect our reputation and we want to make sure that we engender that trust and the business freedom to get into the different businesses we want to get into, we have to have an open dialogue with a wide variety of stakeholders so that we can get their perspective and we can incorporate that into the decision-making process. It could be at a very high level on a big policy issue, or if I'm a construction manager installing FiOS in your neighborhood, it could be where I put, these electronic components in your neighborhood, right? If I don't think about, kids riding around on skateboards and bicycles, I might put it near a sidewalk where if somebody careens off the sidewalk, they could crash into it. But if I'm engaged with that neighborhood and I have a sense as to what your concerns are and I know what goes on there, I can incorporate that into my decision and I can make a better decision on a very practical matter so that, people don't get injured. So again, it's part of our training. We want people to live our values. We want them to make sure that they're taking into consideration input from a broad spectrum of stakeholders because we know it'll help them make better decisions.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. We're going to now turn to Dan and let Dan give his opening remarks regarding how does your organization define corporate responsibility, some of the objectives, the benefits, and maybe a program or two.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to welcome everybody to the Time and Life building. And Christopher, up until about March, we were competitors, but go for it now. Your competitor is sitting right there. Actually, it gets me into, before we can really define what CR, and we also dropped the S at Time Warner, you sort of have to think about what Time Warner actually is. And it's sort of a collection of probably some of the best-known brands in the world. But the Time Warner name itself means more to those of you who subscribe to cable. And frankly, finally, I can honestly say I can do nothing for your hookup. I used to be able to just refer to Harriet, and yes, I still can refer them to you, Harriet. Harriet, raise your hand if anybody has a cable issue. But I think you want to get into a little bit of the legacy, for example, of the building that you're sitting in. My first day at Time Inc., which is where I started, was April 30th, 1980. And I remember getting on an elevator and hearing, there were a couple of other people standing in there, and hearing from out in the elevator bank, "Wait!" Just like that, just "Wait!" And everybody froze and waited. And it took a little while, but this little gentleman, probably, I think he might have been 5'1", kind of slowly made his way into the elevator, looked at everybody, turned and faced the doors, and basically talked to himself for 28 floors. The doors opened, he got off, and the doors closed, and I said, who was that? And somebody said that was Alfred Eisenstadt. Now, who knows think of the famous photograph of the sailor kissing the Eisenstadt is probably one of the most famous photographers that worked at Life magazine. When I got here, there were 6 magazines in this building. HBO was on half a floor downstairs, I think on 2. There's now over 120 magazines. HBO got its own building down the street and offices in California. We've been through a number of mergers, if anybody has been reading any of our magazines and listening to CNN. So I guess the long way of saying this has been and remains in some ways a company in transition. After the merger with AOL in 2001, by around 2003, it became clear that a direction had to be established for what corporate responsibility would be at the company. And that is kind of when this whole process began. We established a corporate responsibility group at corporate, which I guess would make sense, the best place for it. But Time Warner became the first U.S.-based media company in 2006 to publish a corporate responsibility report. And it was in that report that we kind of established what our guidelines were, what we were focused on. And none of this is, it's not rocket science. They weren't, it's customers and content. Diversity is a business initiative, the environment, ethics, governance, and public policy, employees in the workplace, supply chain issues, and focus on the community. So those are probably pretty standard and probably run across most of anyone who is tied to CSR. We actually just came out with our second report in 2008, but probably the key difference for us is this customers and content portion of the report. We kind of are focused on the ways in which the foundations of our corporate citizenship, and that for us the key differentiators are freedom of expression, access to information, journalistic integrity, and diversity to viewpoints and responsibility to community. How all of these support and align with our business strategies. If you think about the company, as I said, this is HBO, this is CNN, this is People, this is Time, these are the brand names that Americans and worldwide have the relationships with. And as an overall company, we tell the world's stories. That's kind of our mission. So focusing on and recognizing that there's this link between employees, customers, communities, and shareholders, and that as a responsible corporate citizen, we working and focusing on these as units will help the long-term sustainability of the company. I was asked the question whether or not have our programs changed. I think probably. This was in regard to the a change in the economy. No. We established a firm mission, and we probably have tweaked it along the way. Our focus in philanthropy has remained on education and the arts. As I said, we've dealt with, we were preparing actually for the spinoff of Time Warner Cable about a good year ago. And just to give you the sense of what that meant, the company went from a little over 90,000 employees to about 38,000 employees, just with that one division going away, which in and of itself makes for a shift in a mindset as we became more and more a pure content company and are continue to head that way. Some examples of. I've lost my place, Carol. Where do you want me to go?
No, I think some examples of how you uniquely approach it.
Well, Examples with our employees, for example. In the arts and education programs, we have established a core internship program that is tied directly to our funding in the arts in the education community, and our funding in education is now focused entirely on college prep programming. If you look at what we're doing in education and the arts. Probably the key way to describe it is talent development, and this is tied back directly into our overall perspective on diversity and diversity of viewpoints, and making sure that talent inside the company, we're aware that we bring the best talent in, and we're also aware of and working with the best talent on the outside of the company. So on the art side, we are working with commissioning programs both here in New York, in London, in Los Angeles. This is developing new filmmakers, young filmmakers, emerging talent. We want to make sure that we have the best opportunities both for the company, but also believing that by seeding the marketplace, all boats rise. Again, on the education side, we also want to make sure that we have access to the smartest accountants, the best PR people, and people and individuals who have the talent to reach across a global marketplace and talk to customers and listen and hear from customers.
So, Dan, it sounds like one of the things that you're doing in a recessionary time is that in addition to dollars, you're using other assets, especially Time Warner assets.
Yeah, we've been using other assets actually for both human capital, which is I think something that we're focused on, both in programs like a board leadership training program for not just high-ranking executives, but making sure that we tap into talent at all levels in the company, and working with not-for-profits to help them with capacity building issues. We also, I mean, as a media company, we have the capability of working in cash and in-kind services. So I looked up our 2008 numbers. Cash overall throughout the company, cash to the community in terms of grants and other initiatives was about $45 million. I do not have access to all of that money. I have access to a small piece of it. Remember that we have several divisions that each and every one of them has their own business initiatives, and I'll talk briefly about those in a moment. The in-kind portion of that was about $216 million worth of in-kind support. The vast majority of that, obviously, in airtime, in ad space, and about half of that was Time Warner Cable. So the focus, we'll still be doing it, obviously, but we won't be doing it quite to the level unless I can get Harriet to throw some time our way.
And why don't we hold off? Those are very, very good examples. Mm-hmm. Let's turn over to Caroline, then we'll get into the Q&A.
Great.
So, Caroline.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Claire. It's terrific to be out of the halls of Pfizer. I don't get to leave very often, so it's really great to be here, and it's great to see such a variety of both companies and nonprofit organizations represented here. I thought I'd start with just a few context-setting items, and you heard a lot about this from Stan and John earlier. For a biopharmaceutical company, we pay a lot of attention to reputation. And one of the recent surveys that we've looked at is the Edelman Trust Barometer. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. It measures trust by individuals in various organizations. And what it says is that, as we expect, that nearly two-thirds of the respondents over the past year have less trust in corporations than they did. And that's not good news for us. It's particularly not good news for a biopharmaceutical company because we've already faced those issues over the past 4 or 5 years pretty significantly. We also know, and I think, John, you touched on this in your presentation, that consumers are increasingly paying attention to corporate responsibility issues in their choices around purchasing of products. And so while it may seem slightly bleak in terms of the trust that that particularly the U.S. population has for corporations, we think it's a rich opportunity for corporate responsibility. We think this is really a pivotal point for corporations, both large ones and small ones, to take a leadership position in this field. So at Pfizer, how do we define what we do? And there is consistency across all three companies in that we've dropped the S as well. We are corporate responsibility. We are a headquarters function. We do have colleagues working in this space across the globe. And just last night had a call with more than 60 colleagues working sort of in this space in a very decentralized approach across the company. I struggle with the terms that we use to talk about what we do. I think we get lost literally in translation. Sustainability, responsibility, it's, one day it's the 3 E's, the next day it's the 3 P's, and by this point senior leadership has lost total faith in you that you know what you're talking about. So we've adopted a pretty straightforward approach, and there are 3 pillars to our work: environment, social, and governance. And that's, I think it's safe to say, and Carol, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the investor community typically uses those pillars to assess companies' performance. We're proud of all 3 of our pillars. I'm going to touch on all 3 of them, but give you a deep dive into the social pillar. On the environmental side, Pfizer did sign on to the UN Global Compact, and a part of that was signing on to the Caring for Climate initiative. So we have and are pressing forward with an ambitious agenda to reduce carbon emissions and improve energy efficiency across our supply chain, which is obviously global in nature. In terms of governance, I think Pfizer has traditionally scored high among socially responsible investor groups in this arena, in part because of how we engage our board and oversight of our company. We've also done several moves that many pharmaceutical companies have over the past several years in terms of disclosure of payments to both physicians and healthcare providers in the U.S. as well as to nonprofit organizations. So those are just a couple of examples within the other pillars. In my team's work, we have responsibility for the social pillar as well as our overall reporting around corporate responsibility. And within the social pillar, I think it's safe to say that Pfizer has as well a strong performance record. In 2008, we gave away $1.9 billion in cash and product. We are not reducing that despite the economic downturn. And if you've been paying attention, a product called Lipitor is going off patent soon. But we have no plans of reducing our overall contributions. We do take a full asset model approach to our work in the social pillar, and that includes our funding, our products, and our people. And Stan talked about the program at IBM this morning. The one that I wanted to spend a little bit of time with you today on is the Global Health Fellows Program, in part because in a time of increased pressure on companies for the bottom line, it's hard to make the case for increased funding for any initiative. The programs that you see where you use your employees are arguably usually the most cost-efficient programs that you can support. And Dan's talked a little bit about that, and you've seen that as a theme. For us, the Global Health Fellows Program was launched in 2003, and the vision behind the program was to take our Pfizer employees, dispatch them to address healthcare issues worldwide. And initially, we thought that the colleagues that would be most attractive to our non-governmental organization partners would be the ones with a healthcare background. Our physicians, our nurses, we have a number of PharmDs and other medical professionals that work at Pfizer. What we found was over the course of the program that our human resource experts, our finance experts, our marketing experts are equally valued by our NGO partners working globally and building healthcare infrastructure. To date, we've deployed 194 Pfizer colleagues. They rotate in, working in partnership with our NGOs for 3 to 6 month assignments. We take it very seriously from a talent development and engagement perspective, and then now are seeing a shift from solely the contributions that they make at working in partnership with our NGOs to really how we can engage Pfizer colleagues more directly in this time of great change in our own company. We want to measure that. We want to embed it in the talent development process, and I think Stan alluded to this. It is a terrific way for employees to get international experience, to really get grounded in the issues that they may then go manage on a day-to-day basis. So we see tremendous opportunity in the Fellows Program. We take very seriously evaluation in all the healthcare programs that we support. We have a platform called Pfizer Investments in Health. For the Fellows Program, we've partnered with Boston University, done several evaluations, and what we've found is that about 100% of our partners feel like the contribution that our fellows have made to their work has been sustainable for the organization over time, which is incredibly important to us, and that for the majority of the NGOs, our colleagues have either met or exceeded expectations. So we're thrilled with those results. I know we want to get to questions, so I'll just conclude by saying I don't think from the perspective of the field that we have necessarily solved the issue of return on investment. I think that there is not broad consensus, at least from my vantage point, that we really know how to measure the impact. I think we can do things on individual programs. I think we can do things with each individual pillar, particularly in the environmental pillar. But I think a lot of work needs to be done. I think we're well positioned, though. You've seen it in the information this morning, to really take a leadership position, to stay focused, and potentially to achieve some great leadership opportunities in the coming years.
Terrific. That was very, very good. We have some excellent questions here, so I'm just going to get right into it. Just a point on the measurement. We've struggled with that because our clients have asked for that for over 20 years, and so we came up with a dashboard, and we call it a return on investment tool. The challenge with it is if you don't gather the data along the way, you can't populate the tool.
That's why we couldn't use your tool.
Yeah, that's all right. So it's a chicken and the egg because, again, measurement, that which gets measured gets done, but you have to carve out budget or people time to do it. So it's one of those things that it is a cosmic conundrum, as we might say. But some other cosmic conundrums from the audience. The first one, and I'm going to ask each one of my panelists, is that more and more companies are understanding that they need to state clear corporate citizenship goals to show their commitment, not just talk about money that they give or issues they address. Can you tell us some clear, compelling goals for your CR programs, goals that can be measured and results communicated? Who wants to start first?
I'll go first.
All right, Dan.
All right. Again, I think I started off by saying that, Time Warner as a corporate entity, we drive some of our CR projects and programs from the corporate level. These are centered on things like the environment issues across the entire corporation, governance, instilling a focus on diversity internally and externally, both in terms of talent and points of view. But each of our business units also has clear business objectives that they've set for themselves. I'll give you some examples. AOL is and these are measurable. AOL is focused on privacy issues and parental control issues. Filmed entertainment, digital piracy issues, ethical sourcing of consumer products, and things like the depiction of tobacco in movies. The networks, and in some cases the networks, and I'm going to call this our news focus, fair and accurate reporting, the coverage of key issues of the day, complete, focus on the diversity of viewpoints. And then when you get into some of the publishing, there's a clear focus on forestry and paper supply and leading the industry in that regard. All of these have been, and they're actually, you check out our reports online. All of these have measurements and they have results shown attached to them.
Great. Who's next?
So goal setting is always an interesting process, particularly when you're, as a corporate function, bridging into the three different pillars. For Pfizer, on the environmental side, we have very clearly defined carbon emission goals, which we've actually already achieved, and our environmental health and safety group is now reviewing and setting new standards and goals, including those for our supply chain. That information is listed on our website, and unfortunately I cannot quote those carbon emission goals off the top of my head. The social pillar, in terms of how we define our work there, we have 8 signature programs. Within each program, we set clearly defined public health goals. I'll give you two examples. One is the International Trachoma Initiative, which is an initiative designed to eliminate blinding trachoma by the year 2020. So that's a pretty aggressive goal. We're going to eliminate a disease, working in partnership with a number of organizations across the world. For Global Health Fellows, our goals have been defined, and as I said, around the ability of the organizations to sustain the work of the fellow over time, and that you begin to see significant changes in the organization's capacity to reach patients. So we have examples of that from Rwanda in a clinic that improved patient capacity load from 10 to 100 patients. So I can take you through those examples. But one of the struggles we've had, quite frankly, around that with the social pillar is that each of our programs are particularly addressing a disease area. And so depending on the epidemiology, the prevalence, and how we design the program, the goals are going to change and vary. And then within the governance pillar, I think that's the one that has been the most interesting. For us, I think it's been a combination of pressure from stakeholders around transparency issues related to payments, and we've set some specific goals internally around that, as well as the ability of patients to see clinical trial data, which we've also made some inroads into. But that particular pillar, I think we've struggled a little bit more with in terms of specific measurable goals.
Great, some great examples.
Okay, so I'll offer two examples, and actually before I get into it, just make this one statement. Verizon is an incredibly conservative organization. This is a real struggle for us in terms of setting goals. We have lots of internal goals, but if I were to sit here and tell you what they were, I mean that is it's sort of like career suicide for me in some respects. We just basically, the way our culture likes to do it, it's an engineering culture. We'll set a goal, we'll meet it. Once we get there, we'll tell people what we did. Sort of putting that out there, saying, for example, we have, so environment, that's an area where we have internal goals. Basically, we've funded a lot of research that indicates that information communication technology writ large, so that's the hardware guys, the software guys, the communications people like us, we're responsible for about 2% of global carbon emissions. So we have goals with respect to our two principal sources of carbon are our fleet. We have the second largest private fleet in the country, so we have goals to basically put more hybrid vehicles in. So last year, for example, we're up to 200 hybrid Priuses. We're looking at our construction vehicles as well, so we have internal goals to reduce the amount of gasoline and diesel that we use and to be more efficient. The second largest is to run our networks. About 90% of our energy cost comes from running wireline and wireless networks. So it's all about electricity, and it's all about using more efficient network components. So, for example, we worked with our suppliers beginning in January of this year. Any network equipment that we purchase has to be 20% more energy efficient than what they delivered to us in the past. So that's the way that we're addressing it. I can't tell you what the number is that we're going to get to, but when we get there, I'll tell you what it is. And then on the one area where we do have some external goals, which I can talk about, is really on the philanthropy side. One of the principal pillars of our philanthropy is in the education, improving the quality of education and improving literacy. So ThinkFinity, which is our online learning platform, last year we had 25 million visitors. So if you go to our corporate responsibility site, I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but we do have actual goals where we're working with school systems across the country to increase the usage of ThinkFinity. So there are goals associated with the number of teachers that are trained on how to use the resources in ThinkFinity, the number of parents that are trained, and then actual goals to drive traffic to the website so we can get people in and pulling lesson plans out.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Now, the next one, it's one of those cosmic conundrums. And one of our audience members said, when corporate responsibility is not written into strategy, do you have some suggestions how you're going to bring it up through the grassroots, moving it from the bottom up into the C-suite so it can begin to get embraced? Not an easy challenge, not easy answer.
I mean, from my vantage point, I think it has a lot to do with senior leadership and their vision and mission sort of ideas and the ethos of the company. And I think for older companies, this is more of a challenge, quite frankly, than perhaps for companies that are smaller and developing now. That's just my take, because this wasn't a part of the dialogue. It's a forced construct for companies that are 150 years old. So I do think there's a difference in the strategies that you would take. Certainly as a healthcare company, whether we're a healthcare company, a biopharmaceutical company, we play in the space of health, and people are very opinionated about health. I think we take that very seriously, and most of the pharma companies have had a very, I think, traditionally advanced thinking in this arena, in part because they've had to, because the expectations for those companies in the space of health are pretty significant. So that, I think, the sort of external pressure has helped increase the ability to get attention by senior management from the older companies.
Right. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, one way to go from the bottom up is through employee engagement initiatives, and some of those can actually be driven by groups of employees. I point to some team initiatives that I've seen put into place throughout this company. At Turner, a group of 20 employees out of London made it their mission to work with an organization that is building schools in East Africa, and they raised the money themselves. They just they turned around and they engaged Turner Corporate to donate airtime to promote this organization, and then they got on a plane and they went down to East Africa and they built a school and an irrigation system. This kind of grassroots giving back begins to filter back up through any company. So that's one way of going about this. I would agree with you. I think going from bottom up all the time is very difficult.
Well, maybe a little different perspective on this. I think it is really difficult to go from the bottom up, but quite frankly, I think it could be more effective doing it that way. And the reason I say that is, obviously, a very old, very conservative company. Most organizations aren't blessed with a CEO that has sort of, CR in their DNA, right? Unless they're sort of, maybe they're a cause, for, the Body Shop or Ben and Jerry's or something like that, right? So I think it's more effective if you look across, like I look across Verizon, and I look at the pockets of people, in Verizon Business. You've got customers out, you've got employees out there marketing travel substitution services to customers because they got the fact that these customers are trying to reduce their carbon footprint. So if they can set up a telework program for them, they can set up, either a large video conference network for them or a desktop-based video conferencing program for them, they can help the customer meet their needs. These things were going on in pockets all around the company, and as we started to sort of uncover them and shine a light on them and share that with the senior management team, all of a sudden they got it. They saw how this, sort of the business connected to the responsibility that we were trying to institute, and now you really got something cooking. So don't sit there and wait for your CEO to come down and say, I want you to do this. You ought to. My job title is what my boss calls me, is sort of the corporate agitator. My job is to get out there, find out what's going on, stir in places where it is, shine a light, and help foster it. And if it's not, stir the pot so we can get something going.
That's great advice. From where we sit, because we have this challenge very often with clients, competitive analyses is often very, very helpful. Who's the competition? What are they doing? Show the metrics. If it's diversity, if it's governance, if it's philanthropy, if it's community. And that usually helps. And then start talking to your colleagues who might be in the C-suite. It might be someone in community relations. It might be the chief marketing officer. It might be even in finance or such, or operations, and begin to get some colleagues to join you. The other thing, there's a very, very good group called the Committee Encouraging Corporate Philanthropy, And while they started with philanthropy, and it was John Whitehead and Paul Newman who started this group, it's over 140 CEOs who are a member of this organization. And while it talks about philanthropy, they have absolutely moved towards corporate responsibility. They won't change their name, but they recognize, as does the BC Center for Corporate Citizenship, that it's not just about community relations, it's all about becoming much more strategic, being aligned with the business. And so, again, CEOs are often, what's my other CEO doing? What's somebody on my board doing? We have a client who has a board member from another client, and they're doing a huge program. He talks to her, and they kind of cross-fertilize. Don't ever underestimate the power of competition, because the C-suite is highly competitive. We have to close this down in a couple minutes, but what I'd like to do is take a not-for-profit question. So is there someone in the room who can raise their hand that we can address? Because I know there are a lot of not-for-profits in the room. We've heard about grants. We've heard about in-kind. We've heard about skills-based volunteerism. Is there anyone that really wants to address that to the panel? Oh, don't be shy. You're going to be shy on me. Okay, I see a hand. Speak loud.
Hi, I'm Stephen Coe. I'm from a group called Community Access to Housing. As a nonprofit, how do we connect with these programs? A lot of corporations in New York, it should be a natural sort of like market out there for nonprofits to be cultivating these relationships. We have a lot of things working like this. We don't rely on resources. Corporations have a lot of resources and people in them. That's a great example of going out to school in Africa.
And interestingly, during these tougher times when dollar budgets are smaller, any advice for the not-for-profits in the room?
I would say if you are not getting at least your volunteers that you already have to think about the employee matching gifts program. These, at least at Pfizer, this is the driver of our cash contributions. We have a very generous employee giving program, and that allows the engagement with a colleague, and it allows a dollar-for-dollar match of any contribution that's coming into your organization. And the reason I say that is we at Pfizer have moved away from over-the-transom requests. We do targeted programs. We do calls for proposals. So unfortunately for your focus area, it would not necessarily match a focus area for us. But we're a citizen of New York, and we try to help bridge in conversation and using our colleagues the other resources that we have available. So it's just something that people don't think about. It's not really sexy anymore. It's just one of those things that many corporations still have, but it is really a valuable asset from my vantage point in terms of driving your revenue.
I would actually also suggest you contact organizations like the Taproot Foundation or New York Cares, which are focused on pulling together volunteer efforts. We've worked with Taproot in the past when we haven't had a lot of dollars, but have funded service grants, which have taken some small amount of cash and the assets of human capital from and expertise from within our corporation and other corporations to do things like create the annual report for a not-for-profit where they didn't have the dollars to create one, build a new website, things of that nature. New York Cares is also a great resource for volunteer efforts. But we're in a similar situation in terms of not accepting, we haven't accepted over the transom requests for grants in a number of years. And you do also need to do, obviously, your research in figuring out whose mission, from a corporate funding perspective, aligns with yours.
So I was going to say, if I could get your business card, we can see what we can do, right? So, but what I think is, when I described before, part of our corporate responsibility strategy is to engage with stakeholders in the community, such as yourself. We would be interested in figuring out, is there a role that our technology can play in helping some of these people with disabilities in these communities, right? We do a lot of work with groups. We're using broadband to enable people that use American Sign Language as their native tongue to speak with one another. So, there might be some opportunities there. And then on employee volunteerism, as Caroline was mentioning, our employees last year volunteered over 600,000 hours in the community. So I am sure that we have people here in the New York area that would be interested in supporting your organization. So let's talk.
Great. Thank you.